Welcome everybody. This is a composition form that is developed by Hudson Jazz Works, a great jazz program that has a summer intensive every year. And since last year, we now have a whole segment that is based on composition and get us inspired to write music. We had some special guests in the past. We just started 2 months ago. But before we talk about the guests, first I would like to welcome the co-founder of the program, Armand Dunelian.
Thanks, Marc. Nice to be here, and just want to thank Marc for the technical expertise that made this possible, and just talk a little bit about what we do at Hudson Jazz Works. We have the summer, like Marc said, the summer workshop this year. It's August 12th to the 15th in Hudson, New York. We normally accept about 10 participants, so it's very small and intensive. And we cover everything, composition, improvisation, how to practice, and we answer a lot of personal questions too. We get into practice routines and also non-musical subjects, just all concerns. And we also have on our board Rose Caldwell, who's the chef de cuisine. That prepares all our meals, and then on the final day we do a concert at the Hudson Opera House in Hudson, New York. Beautiful space there, and it's for the public, so all the participants have a chance to make a showcase of their works in progress that they've developed in the workshop. And so, like Marc was saying, he and I were teaching last summer virtually because of the pandemic, and we had a Zoom with 4 of the composers, and they presented some of their works, and we discussed them together, and it was really a lot of fun and a great interchange of ideas and so on. And so we decided to continue this year. And so today's program is the third of a series that we presented this spring. The first one was with Chris Washburn, and then the second one was with Jean-Michel Pilk. And so today we have as our special guest Richard Boukas, a musician, composer, guitarist, vocalist, educator, and just a wonderful person. I've known Richard probably close to 50 years, and we go way back. So Richard, welcome, and we'd like to start off. Marc, I guess I can ask a question, or unless you have a question to ask first, but if not, then Richard, as a jazz performer and improviser, what aspects of a composition do you personally seek and appreciate that provide the optimal balance between A, the freedom of self-expression during solos, B, sufficient challenges to maintain your interest, that is the oral and technical challenges, and then C, the inspiration that transcends the typical head with its stylistic limitations and approaches an open aesthetic of a standalone composition?
Wow,
I have 1 minute.
right, 1 minute, go. Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me be a part of this. This is really an honor and a privilege, and I know you both collectively for probably 65 years, and your family. You're just your brothers, and so I feel very welcomed and very privileged to be part of this series with your other illuminated guests. So the thing is, in the jazz area, one of the things that is always a push and pull as a composer is to what extent do you have to stultify or compromise your compositional vision for the sake of harmonic facility during improvisation. And that's always, I think, been a conundrum for people who are constantly trying to develop their harmonic vocabulary into areas where the localized harmonic progressions that hopefully caress and support the melody at different points. You can't compromise that. You really can't. Because if you simplify things to the point where you're composing simply for the sake of playing the head and then blowing, then I don't really consider that your compositional imperative is your first priority. Your first priority in that particular case is to make sure that you've got functional harmony, which is comfortable for you and your bandmates to blow on. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with having tunes like that in a mix with others that perhaps are more harmonically sophisticated. In my case, being involved with Brazilian music for over 45 years in its mixtures with jazz, classical, and other influences, I think that what's happened in terms of my jazz composing, particularly, let's say, for Quarteto Moderno, which is saxophone, guitar, bass, drums, quartet, and I think that I really try and not worry about the blowing consequences of my harmonic invention, because I don't want any restraints. You know, because if you impose restraints on yourself harmonically, now there's a difference between imposing restraints for the simplification in the service of easier blowing. There's a difference between that and a difference between making the right choices at the right time. And I think that you can have clarity and complexity at the same time. But the thing is, there are always localized harmonic treatments of particular melodic fragments that it's just what you're hearing, what you're feeling, and what has to be. And I think that the compositional experience and process is a sacred one. And if you can get really close to that self-trust space where you try not to micromanage too much as you're writing, I think that the compositional flow, particularly melodically, has a better chance of having a process continuity, which results in unity in your motivic materials, also better linkages and less seams in the garment between phrases, so that the form sometimes can be deliberately a bit obscure. And if you want to write a 9-bar phrase and you hear it, just like Mozart and Haydn and Purcell did it centuries ago, you write the 9-bar phrase, and the heck with an 8-bar phrase just to make people feel all nice and warm and fuzzy in a jazz setting, you know. So with Brazilian music in the mix with jazz, what I find is that the rhythmic components that make the bedrock of the rhythmic language and the rhythm section and need to be reflected, just like in any style of music, it needs to be reflected in your melodic writing, and it also influences the harmonic rhythm or rate of change of harmony as well. And aside from particular stylistic rubrics and vocabularies that are traditionally sought in order to really feel like you're in a genre in a really authentic way, what I try to do is I try to transcend the predictable. One of the things, and Armen, what was your second question?
Well, it was a question that had 3 parts. The first part was about freedom of self-expression during solos and to what extent the composition allows that. The second part was, does it have sufficient challenges to maintain your oral and harmonic interest? And the third, the inspiration that transcends a typical head with the more open aesthetic of a standalone composition.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah,
That's to
yeah.
me a core aspect of composing for in a jazz context.
Right. Yeah. Well. The thing that I've always tried to do is expand the scope of a form beyond the more brief forms uh, that are like 32 bars long. Just for an example, just an AABA tune. If I am going to write an AABA tune, then the formal dimensions could be 32 bars, plus or minus bars, depending upon phrase elision or extension. Um, so I like to try and create larger forms within the jazz environment so that compositionally I don't feel like ham-tied. And when it gets to the point where you've basically stated the principal part of the composition and it's time to go to some blowing, sometimes what I will do is that if I prejudge, and knowing Lucas Pino, brilliant saxophonist, a former New School student, and if I know that him and Gustavo Amaranci, my bassist, if I know their vocabulary, if I know what they dig, I try and write them in Italian suit. You know, melodically and technically speaking, I really, really try and feel them in my bones when I'm writing. And there's nothing better than writing for people who you know and love and know that are just brilliant and really contributing to your music in a way which actually is greater than the sum of the parts of the players. So what I've done sometimes is taken, let's say, if you take the harmonies of the primary thematic material, and if you put it in a strainer, and then you let some of those details, perhaps some inversions, some passing chords, neighbor chords, things which are much more kind of like meticulous compositional touches that really, really make a big difference in the larger compositional presentation. But what I like to do is then take kind of the essence or the perfume harmonically of a given section and then create a separate section for the blowing where the harmonic rhythm has been simplified, where perhaps instead of repeating a certain form, it goes on to the next series of changes. And then there's the idea of having larger sections being traded by different players. So instead of it being two choruses of saxophone, two choruses of Boukas, and then a chorus of bass player, the really typical kind of thing, what I like to do a lot of times is integrate, larger parts of the form and sometimes actually overlap parts of the form. So, typical example is if you have an ABC form, and then when you get to the blowing, I perhaps would say to Lucas, my saxophonist, well, why don't you blow on AB and I'll blow on CA, and then we'll go around and do that twice.
Sure.
And so, as far as the challenges, and feeling challenged, in other words, basically kicking your own butt with your own music, which is, I think, really like kind of like a blue collar way of saying, if you don't write music that's going to challenge you and you stay in your comfort zone, then when it does get to the blowing, you're not going to grow. You're not going to reach for stuff. And I'm not just talking about melodically affirming the harmonic imperative. I'm talking about rhythmic development as well. And one of the things about Brazilian music that's so exciting and so rich in terms of all the different genres and hybrid genres which exist regionally around the country is that the rhythmic vocabulary is so focal to the entire feeling of the composition that you're writing that you blow differently. You blow, or at least I can only speak for myself. Also, besides being a guitarist, I'm also a drummer and a bass player, and I play enough keyboard to get in trouble in terms of comping. But I basically, when I'm playing, I feel like I'm a drummer or a percussionist that happens to be holding a guitar. And that's particularly the case when I'm comping, because I'm thinking of hits, my percussion instruments, and then the harmonies kind of take care of themselves, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
So I mean, I think that it's really, really important to realize the point at which your harmonic detail in the composition is past the point where you're going to get successful, continuous musical solos. And any composer who just by default is lazy and says, okay, let's blow on these changes and then watch, and then let me watch you guys squirm. You know what I mean? It's not fair. It's not musically viable, and that's when I start thinking about, you know, sifting the flour, and then what's left are the kernels of the really core harmonic modulatory movements that then a jazz improviser, you know, regardless of whether it's really traditional jazz or mixed with Brazilian Afro-Cuban music, like that's when they can really sink their teeth into the modulations and turn those corners more agilely. So that's one solution. That's one very helpful solution, creating separate blowing, which has the perfume and the taste of the original composition harmonically, enough of it. And then another thing that you can do, which I like to do in certain tunes, is to have a vamp coda, which is almost like sometimes a distillation of the key centers that are developed through across a larger number of measures, but then compress it and basically be like in this kind of spherical, like rotating key center, constant like destabilization of key center, and then trade with that. So between Lucas and I will trade, and trading also is like very exciting too. I think that the idea of a siloed solo, it's fine, but you know, it's not as exciting. And I think that I always play better, I always blow better when I'm working off of someone that's just played some amazing stuff the way Lucas does, and I go, oh my God. And it's not like an ear training, oh, I got you. It's not like trying to imitate what somebody did, but it's taking what they did and trying to develop a certain aspect of it so that the composite improvisation of two or more players actually becomes a single solo that has its own developmental integrity. And that's when you know you're really listening to each other and you're not saying, okay, 3 bars to go. Oh, I'm really stressing on this progression. Oh, I'm going to blow it, you know. You know. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, and that's why I've been writing so much chamber music, particularly for a Dialogos duo with Louis Arquez, the clarinetist, and bass clarinetist, because I want to break free of smaller forms. I want, through composing, I really want to develop my ideas across a much broader palette.
That brings me to my question, my third question, because Armen already gave my first 2 questions to you. So that's good, we're on the same page. My first question is that you're very well versed in a lot of different genres. You have a strong foundation from a jazz point perspective. You have a very deep understanding with passion with Brazilian music, but you also have a very thorough, well-grounded understanding of the whole classical repertoire,
Yeah.
which where you have been going very deeply into.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, as an aspiring composer, which is really what we are, who we are talking to right now in this series, is that typically what would happen is that we write music because hopefully we write music because we want to create, right? We want to create something, we want to write something that we hear, we want to compose, we want to write some sounds, and then you start writing, and then you hit all kind of barriers, and you realize, okay, I have some learning to do, right? Some learning to do. And then hopefully, if you keep on moving forward, you realize, well, in order to go to the next step, I better look back behind me and see what happened in the past, because else I will never get there. So then you go back to all the classical composers, and so it's like a general development of a composer. The further you go ahead, the further you have to go backwards to really to fit all the pieces together and understand the whole equation of what composition possibly could be. So my question is as twofold. Number one, what are some of the integral things that inspired you as a starting composer, where you felt like, oh man, I want to write more music? That's number one. And number two is for a beginning composer. I mean, beginning, they are composing, but they still have a long road ahead. What are some things that you would want to get into to get inspired by?
Okay, so the first question refers to like what was it like when I first started writing, like let's say in my early 20s.
Yeah, what inspired you to
Yeah,
develop?
well, since I was born in 1953, the and discovered, the greats of the late 50s and the hard bop, and the blue note period when I was in my teens. Um, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, McCoy, uh, Tony, Ron, uh, Chick. I mean, like these were and then a lot of the hard bop guys like Hank Mobley and people like that. I mean, I was playing a lot of fusion, and I did not have my bebop vocabulary together. I was playing, excuse the expression, a lot of pentatonic bullshit. And just kind of getting away with my chops and a lot of overdrive on my guitar, and that's called fusion. So, so I had a lot of learning to do, but I was so inspired by these incredible recordings that I voraciously not well, I had different houses with different roommates at different times, and they were basically jam session pads where there could be 3 jam sessions going on at the very same time. And being that I play all the rhythm section instruments to one extent or another, there was always room for somebody that hadn't shown up yet or somebody that left. So I could unplug, after taking a solo in one jam session, and then somebody would say, hey man, the bass player split, can you like take your Fender and play a couple of tunes? Or hey man, the drummer hasn't shown up yet, and it's like a Bill Evans kind of brush vibe. Are you into that? Yeah, sure. So that was my school. That listening voraciously, transcribing, and not just transcribing solos to ingest and assimilate soloing vocabulary, but transcribing rhythm section instruments. Because if you don't have an understanding of what makes a rhythm section really happen, and what the interrelationships are between the rhythm section instruments, then there's always going to be this bifurcation of I'm the soloist, you're the rhythm section, isn't that nice? And there's no synergy, there's no bleeding, there's no there's nothing visceral about it. It's like from the neck up, you're playing good notes, and isn't that nice?
Right. And how does that transfer into the compositional journey? Because that's what we
Yeah,
are.
well, the thing is, so as a result of immersing myself in like the post bop and blue note period, and I would also include composers like Joe Henderson and Bobby Hutcherson and people like that. It was that kind of and Wayne was that very angular, non-functional harmony that really appealed to me, because it wasn't 2-5-1. And lots of stepwise movement up or down by minor thirds, major thirds, what have you. And so, and then when you've got these aphoristic forms that are like 16 bars, or even if it's an AABA tune, there's so much modulatory stuff to sink your teeth into as an improviser. But as a composer, I knew that I needed to have that level of sophistication. And I knew along the way in my early 20s that when I was writing these tunes for Lovano or Ralph LaLama or Tommy Harrell, I knew they were derivative. It took a while for me to get my voice, and I would say that the breaking point for me, and again, from the mid 70s when I was in my early 20s all the way through, I was very also involved with Afro-Cuban music, and I was playing baby bass and salsa bands. And that's how I learned that music, from like doing gigs as a bassist, because guitar is not really indigenously an instrument in that music. So I think that having that experience of standing in the shoes of the masters and composing with the assimilation of their stylistic vocabulary, it's almost the same as if you were in a composition class in a structured program like the New School or Madness, and they said, okay, we want you to write a 3-voice Bach fugue, you know, etc., using the tonal answer, etc. It's the same thing. I knew I was going through the paces of working myself towards another vision. And eventually, when I got to playing trio, after playing quartet for a really long time with saxophone, guitar as piano, bass and drums, and I started my trio with John Riley and Mike Formanek, that changed everything, like 1982. And I released Embarcadero, my second LP, on my own label, Jazz Essence. And what happened was I instantly started writing more even eighth note music. And it wasn't because I was so influenced by other people doing it, but I felt that the swing articulation, like, I was done with it. Like, I couldn't say anything more compositionally that had ingenuity and freshness using that orientation rhythmically in the rhythm section as the fulcrum upon which I would compose and improvise. So I started writing like even eighth note music that had some Brazilian and Afro-Cuban influences, and then some classical influences. So for example, on that record I wrote Frederick Samba, which essentially it's like Chopin and Brahms on a field day. and there's no blowing. The complete form happens twice, and the second time around there's like 7-voice counterpoint going on with my vocals, and there's counterpoint and extra guitars, and so the production value, even in a trio setting, my vision in terms of production and counterpoint was already like exceeding what a trio could do. But for composers that are kind of, you know, starting out, and they really want to you know, develop their craft, I think one of the best ways you can do that is by looking at certain tunes as models and observing specific aspects harmonically, melodically, rhythmically, formally, texturally, metrically, looking at those models and saying, well, what if I wrote like if I use Night Dreamer, with that Elvin triplet feel in 3, what if I wrote a tune with that rhythmic skeleton? What would be different about that and writing a Bill Evans waltz, right? And so if you take a look at the rhythmic clothing that basically acts as the attraction for the harmonic and melodic material, then you can start to model yourself after certain composers and recognize stylistic traits that you just feel good doing, even though you know it's not really you yet. And so modeling is really, really good. I do need to discuss modeling and tributes as being a really great way of building your vocabulary. So for example, for Diálogos Duo, which is a contemporary Brazilian chamber duo of clarinet and guitar and sometimes bass clarinet with Louis Arquez, every movement that I've written for us, now there's 83 movements, 8 suites, 83 movements in 4.5 years that I've written, and it's the largest body of contemporary Brazilian music written for guitar and clarinet in the world. Every movement is a tribute to a great Brazilian composer or musician. So the vibe is like I'm channeling their influence, their perfume, their essence, and still trying to have a mark of my own on it. And that's the challenge. In other words, like like, yes, you want to do a tribute to Pichinguinha, but you don't want it to sound so much like Pichinguinha that you're not leaving yourself any creative room for your own vision. And so when I wrote the Dozen Choro Tributes, which is the basis for our second CD that was released sometime during COVID, right? And, you know, when I picked the 12 people that I wanted to honor, I do this for every suite. I make a list of the people I want to honor, and then if there are subgenres or multiple genres that I want to represent in that suite, then I write them down, and then I start making lines. I start making connections saying, well, if it's Pichinguinha, like a machixe would be, if it's Ernesto Nazaré, you know, the amazing seminal classical pianist that incorporated Afro-Brazilian rhythms and vocabularies into his solo piano music, then it was going to be a waltz that had a lot of drenched with Chopin pathos, you know. If it was going to be Hermeto Pascoal, whose music, you know, along with Ginga's music, I would say are two of the most profound and continually profound influences on my own writing. If it's going to be Hermeto, you know, it's like going to be harmonically dense, melodically impossible to play, and just complete freedom. You hear it, it exists, you write it. And so the thing about being in the cradle, being cradled in the arms of the masters and writing within that comfort zone, it's a great way to model. And if you still feel like you don't have enough of their essence in your heart and in your gut and in your ear, then you got more listening and transcribing to do. And I think that one of the things that a young composer can do is follow their pleasure principle. And if they dig a composition and if there's no chart for it, because it might be a piece written by one of the young lions, you know, that's not in a fake book yet. So transcribe it, analyze it, look at it, sing it, play it. Just like use it as clay to develop your instincts and your recognition of certain stylistic characteristics, which at a certain point for a great composer is just instinct. The choices that they make, when you get to a certain level, the choices you make they make themselves. The music writes themselves. So there is one image that's always very inspiring. The great Jovino Santos Neto, with whom I had a duo for several years in the late 90s into the mid 2000s. When I was interviewing him for my thesis on Hermeto Pascoal for my master's, I said, you know, how is Hermeto so prolific? Like what is it that it's just like he's always writing? And he said, well, man, you know, anyway, I won't imitate Jovino because I love him to death, and he's been an amazing inspiration. But basically what he said is, he said, the music for Hermeto, the music's already out there. All you have to do is let it in. And with Hermeto, it's like a faucet, except the faucet's always on. And when he said that, it just completely blew me away. It said to me, like, Boukas, how often is your faucet really on, and how long can you keep it on? How long can you actually be a transparent energy, creative energy, and let the music just come through you and feel the God energy and feel the gratitude for being able to experience the creative inspiration that hopefully is informed by you going deep, really, really deep into certain composers who you absolutely are fascinated by, challenged by, love, and know that you will grow by being, you know, in going deep into their music.
Wow, Richard, that's such a beautiful and powerful description of your compositional aesthetic and process. I've always been an admirer of your piece, Montunomorphosis.
Oh my God, yeah.
That goes way
I
back.
know. That's your one trick pony with me, right?
And no, no,
Yeah.
no.
No, no,
That
I'm
piece,
kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah.
if there were one piece I would recommend that people listen to, just for that spirit that you talked about having the faucet turned on.
Yeah.
Boy, I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and when you think it's over, then it goes into a new section, and then you're taking us, on a different trip to some other planet, and it's like you've had that capacity from the very beginning, and that's always been something that I've admired, and it goes along with who you are. I mean, just now in your your verbal description, uh, you know, it's like never ending, and so when we hear your music, we feel that as well. That the possibilities are infinite, and ultimately they never stop.
Well, that's the hope, right? The hope is that it doesn't stop. And I think one thing for composers at any stage of their development, aside from trusting your instincts and sometimes your first instincts, I think it's really, really important to work on the craft of composition. Take risks. Really take risks with no guarantees whatsoever. Like put your butt out the window and see what happens if you do X, Y, and Z, and how you can catapult yourself with melodic, rhythmic, and harmonic momentum into that next section where you're feeling like a wall, right? One thing that I is if I get to a spot where I feel like there's a number of muito caminho, like if there's like a lot of different roads you can take, lots of crossroads, what I'll do is essentially, on a side piece of paper from my sketch, like just regular photocopied printed music paper, I'll write down the measure number, which is like the block zone, and then I'll go one, like as if like first ending, second ending, third ending, fourth ending, and basically I will take each possible road as far as it can go until I feel like, okay, let me try another possibility, and I'll end up with sometimes several possibilities of continuation of a given phrase, or seven different possibilities of the beginning of, let's for lack of nomenclature, the bridge. And usually what happens is kind of interesting, is that sometimes the very first thing you write, you end up using the last time that particular thematic aspect comes back, let's say in the recapitulation, right? And then sometimes the last thing you use, the last thing that you discover is because you're really warmed up and you're like creating those possibilities, and you feel that flow. And then sometimes the last thing that you write is the best thing, the best first thing to use. And so you have this compendium of possible continuations. So for composers who feel like the forms of jazz are like create these like it's almost like going 80 miles an hour and then you hit customs. It's like, okay, so what do you want to write for the bridge? So it's like, I think that what you have to do is really take risks and work on not only channeling your intuition and being true to your inspiration as transparently as possible as the beauty is coming through you, but work the craft of composing, like as if like you open the hood of a car and say, well, man, we got to replace that spark plug, and like you really become a compositional mechanic where you're working the material and working it and squeezing every last motivic drop out of it. every last reharmonization that's possible, every last inversion, which against the melodic note at that point is poetic. And you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, when you get, like in classical music, when you get like a Bach recitative in the cantata, it always starts out with a first inversion major chord, right? Let me just get the piano on here. So. Ach, mein Gott, ich sind see what I'm saying? So if you look at a Bach recitative, that's some great ear training transcribing. Transcribe the changes to a Bach recitative in a cantata, and the modulations that he's going through make giant steps look like baby stuff. I am absolutely serious. I'm serious as a heart attack about that. If you take some of the best recitatives from Bach's cantatas and transcribe, you will never be a root position limited jazz musician for the rest of your life. Once you realize the beauty of what it sounds like to have a root on top of just a basic first inversion chord, there's just something really, really gorgeous about that. And there's something really, really gorgeous about having a third on top with a second inversion chord. And it's that outer voice structure. I mean, I talk about this when I teach ear training, but it's feeling the outer voice structure, the relationship of the melody unfolding, and what bass note and harmony is like just the right one. Come on, man. Get it, get it, get it. And once you find it, and your first choice might be by default a root position harmony, but then you realize that there's no poetry, there's no beauty, there's something lacking that falls through the bottom, and you need to reconsider not only localized inversions for the coloration of the melody with the outer voice structure, but you're also looking at creating bass line movement which has its own unique path. And it's not just functional, fifth root movement in root position. And so if you listen to not only Bach but particularly Brahms, you're going to get in Chopin, you're going to get a lot of stepwise bass lines combining root position and inverted harmonies. And not only does that address the melodic beauty relationship of the outer voice structure that I was talking about, but also what it does is that it gives the bass line its own personality. It gives it its own integrity. As it goes beyond function, it becomes an integral part of the composition, and it's from there that you start to realize how limited certain periods of jazz are in terms of root position, root position, root position. There's nothing wrong with that music. It's beautiful music. It's the Bach of jazz. And you've got to go through that in order to transcend it. And Armen, being a lifelong meditator and yoga practitioner, he's very aware of those days when he's sitting and there's just a whole lot of thoughts going through his head. And that monkey's jumping up and down on the pole, and he can't quite shake it and just get that space of quiet. But you have to go through the tough stuff in order to get the clarity. And you have to trust that you will prevail if you have faith. But you have to have faith as a composer. Enough faith so that you're taking a certain modicum of risk, and also not getting in the way of your own intuition. Not trying to fashion your inspiration, to do what you think the right thing is. Because if you start to micromanage every move that you make, then the flow just goes out the window. And what happened, man? I had all these great ideas, and it's because you basically imposed myopia on you, localized details way before you had any feeling for structure, phrase structure, form, harmonic progression. and just the unfolding of a melody. You know, if you start thinking too vertically, like how am I going to harmonize this thing? Another thing you can do also is that you could take the harmonies of, let's go back to Wayne again. So let's say, what's that Wayne ballad that goes? Miyako, right. Just take the changes of Miyako and write a Wayne-style ballad with a different melody. Do 5 of them. Do 20 of them. And be Wayne. Just get into Wayne's vocabulary so that you can then push off and start to find your own voice in that particular kind of metrical and rhythmic orientation. Again, it's a modeling, so it's kind of a measured freedom. It's a certain amount of restriction because you're writing over a pre-existing set of changes, right? But there's enough room for creativity because you're writing the melody. And Krishnamurti, J. Krishnamurti, the great philosopher from India, once, said many times, along with freedom comes responsibility. So if you're going to take chances and be like very like blasé, oh, I'll try this, I'll try that. It's like throwing junk at the wall. In other words, your own self-awareness of integrity and really setting the bar high for yourself is gone. But if you have a harmonic structure that's helping you, or in the case of shoro, which is based on European dance forms like the waltz, the polka, the schottisch, etc. You've got these 16-bar sections that harmonically have like this really strong harmonic progression, fundamental basis. So writing shoros for me is like, it's not easy to write a great shoro, believe me, but there's a certain comfort zone when you've got a pre-existing formal structure. And that formal structure, it breaks down into subsections, and those subsections break down into phrases, and those phrases have a particular harmonic orientation. And so the melodies come easier because you got that buttress. You're not basically going like this forward, and the harmonic, melodic, and rhythmic vocabulary just isn't coming to you because you have to. It's a blank page, man. The blank page is like, it's daunting. But
great, Richard.
Eventually you get something down, and there's one more thing that I wanted to suggest to young composers, especially if you have a vision for writing longer forms, and not just jazz composers, but let's say contemporary classical, chamber music composers, etc. Try not to leave a piece in progress for more than one day, because you're going to lose the thread. And when you lose the thread, so on a Monday you write 24 bars, and then Tuesday's just, you're teaching, you're doing this, you got fixing your car, and then you get to Wednesday and you look at what you wrote on Monday, which you remember being a very inspired experience, very intuitive, organic experience. It's really hard to get back into that head. And Gary knows this better than anybody else, and so do you, Armen and Marc. It's like Jovino has a very nice metaphor, which is like you got to hold tight on the lizard's tail. And I can't tell you from the 70s and the 80s how many unfinished compositions I have, reams of unfinished compositions, because I didn't have the patience and the discipline to say, hey man, those were some pretty strong ideas. Make sure you don't leave it for a week and play like 5 weddings on the weekend and be like blown out, and Monday you look at it and go, oh my God, I'm not in that space anymore. I don't know who wrote this. A month later, life is big, 2 months later, you're not the same person the next second. even if you're living in the moment, you're a different person. So you can't expect to go back. You got to just keep, just hold that lizard's tail for life and try and finish the piece. You can always go back and revise it, but if you lose the thread, it's a tragedy. It's almost like an early death, like Schubert or Purcell. You know, it's like God or Bird, you know, or Train. Just imagine if any of those incredible musicians, composers lived another 25 years, what the music would be.
Yeah.
Richard, you're so expressive and articulate in the way you
Well,
describe the creative process. And unfortunately, we're out of time, and
right.
we have to kind of bring it to a close. But I want to thank you once more.
Oh man,
Uh,
thank you. This is wonderful, and you know what? It's so inspiring to be among all of you, and you know, including Gary and Derek.
You
Uh,
know, one additional thing I want to mention is that because we talked about these processes and about what I really I think is very special about what you mentioned and what you put on the table is the balance between passion, melody, and storyline and what you have to say and the beauty of the music, and then relate that to knowledge. And I think that is a big challenge for everybody.
yeah,
And I think one of the things that is inspiring for me, I've had a chance to play in your band once as a sub, so
you did a
I was
great job. You did an amazing job to do one
uh,
gig with Quartetto Moderno and play all that insane music. I mean,
almost,
oh,
yeah.
you killed it. You
Yeah.
did kill it, Mark.
But what it was great is that you know you have a lot of uh, uh, people that invest themselves a lot in the theory of composition, in understanding how it works,
Mhm.
and then you have people that write a lot, and then you have people that have it all together. And that is when I'm thinking of you. You have such a vast. I'm one of the most. Not many people that know that have such a vast amount of knowledge and understanding because you dedicated yourself without any holds barred to what this all entails composition, but you never lost the number one goal in music, which is the passion, the fire, inspiration, the love,
Mhm.
and you have been able to always keep that pure. And I think this is one of the biggest lessons for me, anyways, that I think for everybody to acknowledge the discussion, which it's at the center. I think for everything here.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
think
that's
one of the real gifts is when you have great players to write for, pretend that they're going to go away tomorrow, and it's the last piece you're ever going to write for them, and you'll never see them again.
mm,
And I'm not saying to put yourself into this artificial state of deprivation and guilt. You know, it's just that like so for example, Louis Arquez, right, this great French clarinetist, I'm not sure where he's going to be a year from now, 2 years from now. He could get a teaching gig in Europe or Scandinavia or something, and then what? So by the end of the year, I want to have 10 suites, 100 pieces of music. And it's not quantity over quality. It's just that when you have a great player or great players to write for, what a blessing, what a gift, because you carry their heart, their genius, their sound. They're always with you. They're part of you. And it's so much easier to write when you're not just in a test tube hypothetically writing for some band that you hope to put together. The
right.
personalization of the writing for the player, not just technically, but just what would they dig playing?
Right.
Write that. You know, it makes composing not easier, but the fluency of your ideas comes out because you're really connecting with the people you love who have invested so much in this case of my music that it's like again the difference between going to Men's Warehouse and buying this ragged suit and then going to going to Rome and having an Italian suit made for you. You want to make Italian musical suits for your sidemen.
Richard,
On that note,
yeah, we're gonna send it.
Let's buy some clothes, baby.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And the only thing I'll say is if anybody's interested, and Mark, maybe you could put a CG on there when you edit it. If you go to boukas.com, my site is very extensive, you know, compositionally, educationally, all that stuff. So there's a lot there, and have fun. And if you have any questions, you know, you can just go to the contact page and shoot me an email.
fantastic, Richard. Thank you so much.
No, I
Thank
mean,
you, Mark. Yeah.
I'm so jazzed, man. I'm so jazzed. Like right now, all I want to do is